He believed there was only one mistake powerful men could never afford to make. But within the next 60 seconds, Vincent Castellano would discover there was something even more dangerous than trusting the wrong ally. It was ignoring the quietest voice in the room. The morning sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Castellano Holdings, painting long bands of golden light across polished walnut floors and a conference table carved from a single slab of dark American oak. Outside, downtown Chicago moved with its usual confidence, taxis weaving through traffic, pedestrians hurrying beneath towering glass buildings, unaware that a single signature inside the penthouse office could quietly reshape fortunes worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Vincent Castellano stood at the head of the table in a tailored charcoal suit that fit him with effortless precision, his calm blue eyes fixed on the final page of a thick contract resting before him. Every executive around the room waited for the same moment. The attorneys had reviewed every clause. The financial advisors had approved every figure. The acquisition had taken nearly 11 months to negotiate, and today it would finally become official. No one questioned the document anymore. No one except the woman who wasn't supposed to be looking at it. Naomi Carter moved silently along the edge of the room with a soft microfiber cloth in one hand and a small bottle of furniture polish in the other. Her housekeeping uniform was spotless, her dark curls neatly gathered behind her head, and her expression carried the same quiet professionalism that had made her almost invisible during the 8 months she had worked inside the Castellano estate and corporate offices. She knew exactly which shelves gathered dust first, which crystal awards required special handling, and which rooms she was expected to leave before important meetings began. Today had been no different until a single sentence near the bottom of the final page caught her eye as she reached to wipe the edge of the conference table. She froze for only a heartbeat. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers tightened around the cloth. Then she looked again, hoping she had misunderstood. She hadn't. One phrase hidden beneath pages of flawless legal language awakened a memory she had spent years trying to bury. The room remained perfectly silent except for the gentle hum of the city beyond the glass and the faint ticking of an antique wall clock imported from Boston decades earlier. Vincent uncapped his fountain pen. Every eye followed the elegant black barrel as it hovered above the signature line. Naomi's pulse pounded so loudly she could almost hear it over the silence. She knew the rules. Employees never interrupted meetings. Employees never commented on contracts. Employees especially never questioned Vincent Castellano. Yet the words escaped before fear could stop them. "Sir." Her voice was soft enough that several people thought they had imagined it. Vincent paused without looking up. Naomi swallowed once before speaking again. "That signature could cost you everything." The fountain pen stopped less than an inch above the paper. The silence that followed felt heavier than marble. Slowly, Vincent lifted his eyes from the contract and turned toward the woman standing quietly beside the conference table. For the first time since she had entered his world, the most powerful man in the room looked directly at his housekeeper, and something in her steady gaze made him lower the pen instead of signing his name. No one spoke. The executives exchanged uncertain glances, while the senior attorneys looked from Naomi Carter to Vincent Castellano, as though the room itself had stopped moving. Vincent did not raise his voice. He simply placed the fountain pen on the polished table and folded his hands. His expression revealed nothing, yet everyone present understood that silence from a man like Vincent was often more intimidating than anger. Naomi remained exactly where she was, her shoulders relaxed, her hands resting around the folded microfiber cloth she still held. She neither lowered her eyes nor challenged his stare. She simply waited. After several long seconds, Vincent spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Everyone except Miss Carter may leave." The request surprised the room even more than Naomi's interruption. One by one, expensive leather chairs slid backward across the floor. Attorneys quietly collected their briefcases. Financial advisors gathered folders without saying a word. Within less than 2 minutes, the massive conference room that had moments earlier been filled with conversation and confidence became almost completely silent. The heavy doors closed softly behind the last executive, leaving only Vincent and Naomi facing each other beneath the warm morning sunlight. Vincent slowly walked around the conference table until he stood only a few feet away from her. He studied the woman who had spent months quietly cleaning offices before sunrise and preparing conference rooms before anyone important arrived. He suddenly realized something unsettling. He knew almost nothing about her. He knew she arrived early every morning. He knew she never complained. He knew every employee respected her kindness. Beyond that, she had always blended into the background like another piece of carefully arranged furniture. "How long have you been reading contracts?" he asked without accusation. Naomi looked briefly toward the unfinished agreement before answering. "I was not reading the contract, sir. I noticed one sentence while cleaning the table." Vincent tilted his head slightly. "One sentence?" "Yes, sir. And from one sentence you believe every attorney in this building missed something?" Naomi did not rush her answer. "I believe everyone trusted what they expected to see instead of what was actually written." Vincent narrowed his eyes. There was no arrogance in her voice, no attempt to impress him. She sounded like someone quietly stating the weather. That unsettled him far more than confidence would have. He picked up the contract and opened it to the final page. "Show me." Naomi hesitated for only a moment before stepping closer. She did not touch the document. Instead, she pointed to a single paragraph halfway down the page. "There." Vincent followed her finger. At first glance, the language appeared ordinary, almost identical to dozens of commercial agreements he had signed over the years. He looked back at her. "Explain." Naomi inhaled slowly. "If I am wrong, I will. Apologize and leave immediately." Vincent gave a slight nod. "If you are right." She met his eyes with the same quiet composure she had carried since entering the room. "Then you still have time to protect everything you built before your name becomes the most expensive signature of your life." Vincent lowered himself into the chair at the head of the table and slowly rotated the contract until it faced Naomi. He did not interrupt her. He simply watched as she leaned forward just enough to read the paragraph without placing a hand on the document. "This clause appears harmless because it is surrounded by routine language," she said quietly. "It describes a standard transfer of administrative authority during the integration period. Most people stop paying attention after the first few lines because everything sounds familiar." Vincent followed each sentence with growing concentration. "Continue." Naomi nodded once. "The wording changes here." She indicated a single sentence near the bottom of the page. "The agreement quietly expands temporary administrative authority into discretionary operational authority." Those two phrases sound similar, but legally they are not the same. Administrative authority allows someone to manage procedures. Discretionary operational authority allows someone to make decisions that can permanently affect ownership, assets, and executive control. Vincent looked back at the paragraph. The distinction was subtle enough that most readers would glide over it without hesitation. "The language is intentionally smooth," Naomi continued. "Every sentence before it builds trust. Then one unfamiliar phrase changes the meaning of everything that follows." Vincent read the clause again, this time much more slowly than before. The confidence he had carried into the meeting began to fade beneath careful analysis. He had negotiated business transactions for years, yet even he had accepted the paragraph at face value because it appeared to match dozens of agreements he had reviewed before. "What happens if I sign?" he asked. Naomi answered without drama. "Nothing immediately. That is what makes it effective. There would be no alarm, no obvious loss, no public dispute. Weeks later, someone could exercise authority that you never intended to grant. By then, every action would point back to your own signature." The room became quiet once more. Outside the windows, a helicopter crossed the Chicago skyline, while sunlight reflected across neighboring glass towers. But inside the conference room, time seemed to narrow around a single sheet of paper. Vincent reached for his office telephone and pressed one button. "Ask Mr. Harrison, Ms. Delgado, and Mr. Brooks to return immediately. Bring every marked draft of this agreement." His assistant acknowledged the instruction, and the line disconnected. Vincent closed the folder without taking his eyes off Naomi. "If the attorneys confirm what you have found, I will want to know how you recognized it in less than a minute." Naomi gave a respectful nod. "I understand, sir." Neither of them spoke again until the conference room doors opened several minutes later. The legal team entered carrying binders, annotated drafts, and digital tablets, expecting to answer routine questions before the signing resumed. Instead, they found the contract closed, the fountain pen untouched, and the quiet housekeeper still standing beside the table. Vincent looked at his lead attorney with steady composure and slid the agreement across the polished wood. "Before anyone asks me to sign another page," he said evenly, "I want every word in this paragraph examined again, because the person who may have saved this company is not sitting where any of us expected." The three senior attorneys took their seats without the relaxed confidence they had carried only minutes earlier. Thick binders opened across the conference table, digital copies appeared on their tablets, and every marked revision from the previous 11 months was placed beside the final agreement. Vincent remained silent. He simply nodded toward the paragraph Naomi had identified. "Start there." Richard Harrison, the firm's chief legal counsel, adjusted his glasses and began reading the clause aloud, slowly this time, allowing every word to settle into the room. Maria Delgado followed on another copy, comparing the final language against an earlier draft, while Ethan Brooks searched through the revision history. For several minutes, the only sounds came from turning pages and quiet taps across tablet screens. Naomi stood near the windows, saying nothing. She neither defended herself nor attempted to persuade anyone further. She had already spoken when it mattered. Now the document would have to speak for itself. Richard finally broke the silence. "The wording appears standard." Maria nodded cautiously. "At first glance, yes." Ethan continued scrolling through archived revisions before suddenly pausing. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Hold on." Every eye turned toward him. This sentence was different in revision 27. He enlarged the comparison view and placed the tablet flat on the table. "Administrative authority." He switched to the final version. "Discretionary operational authority." Richard leaned closer, his confidence beginning to soften. "Who approved that revision?" Ethan searched through the document history. It was submitted during the final consolidation before execution. Maria compared both versions line by line. Everything surrounding the sentence stayed almost identical. That makes the substitution incredibly difficult to notice unless someone compares every revision side by side. Vincent folded his hands as he watched the discussion unfold. Nobody looked toward Naomi anymore with disbelief. Instead, several of the attorneys found themselves quietly glancing in her direction, trying to understand how someone with no visible role in the negotiation had identified what an experienced legal team had overlooked. Richard slowly removed his glasses. "Miss Carter." Naomi looked at him politely. "Yes, sir." "How did you notice the difference so quickly?" She answered with the same calm voice she had maintained all morning. "Because the sentence interrupted the rhythm." Confused expressions spread across the table. Naomi continued. "Legal language usually follows predictable patterns. When one phrase suddenly changes the balance of authority without changing the tone of the paragraph, it creates a quiet inconsistency. Most readers focus on definitions. I noticed the rhythm first." The room became silent once again. Richard looked back at the contract, then at the revision history, before giving an almost reluctant smile of professional respect. "That is exactly why we missed it. We were verifying definitions we expected to change. We were not listening for the sentence that no longer sounded like the rest." Vincent slowly stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. Reflections from neighboring skyscrapers shimmered across the glass, while traffic continued far below, completely unaware that a multi-million-dollar transaction had just stopped because of one observation made by the quietest employee in the building. Without turning around, Vincent spoke in a thoughtful voice. "There is still one question none of us has answered." He faced Naomi again. "How does a housekeeper hear the rhythm of legal language better than an entire room full of attorneys?" Naomi did not answer immediately. She lowered her eyes for only a moment, not out of fear, but as though she were carefully choosing which truth belonged in the room and which could remain in the past. The attorneys waited. Vincent remained motionless beside the windows, his attention fixed entirely on the woman everyone had overlooked for months. Finally, Naomi lifted her gaze. "Because legal language has a rhythm that never truly leaves you once you have lived with it long enough." Richard Harrison exchanged a puzzled glance with Maria Delgado. "What exactly does that mean?" Naomi offered a faint, polite smile. "It means that when one word quietly changes the balance of power, it sounds different even before it looks different." Ethan Brooks slowly closed his tablet. "You speak like someone who spent years writing these agreements." Naomi did not deny it, but she did not confirm it either. Instead, she looked toward the city beyond the glass. Sometimes experience stays with a person even after the title disappears. The room fell silent again. Vincent walked back to the conference table and opened the contract one more time. He no longer saw a routine business agreement. He saw a document that had nearly become one of the most expensive mistakes of his career. He carefully removed the signature page and placed it aside before turning to Richard. Contact the other side. Tell them the signing is postponed until every revision is independently verified. Richard nodded immediately. Yes, sir. And I want every draft that passed through their legal department compared against ours, line by line. We will begin immediately. No one questioned the order. The confidence that had filled the room earlier that morning had been replaced by disciplined caution. As the attorneys quietly organized their materials, Vincent looked once more at Naomi. You understood the risk before anyone else, yet you almost walked away without saying a word. Naomi answered honestly. I almost did. Why? She folded the cleaning cloth carefully before speaking. Because I was hired to clean offices, not interrupt negotiations. I knew I might embarrass everyone in this room, including myself, if I misunderstood what I saw. Vincent studied her face. There was no pride in her expression, only quiet sincerity. What changed your mind? Naomi looked directly at him. I asked myself one question. If I stayed silent and watched someone lose everything because I was afraid to speak, would I be able to live with that decision tomorrow morning? Those words settled over the conference room with greater weight than any legal argument. Maria slowly lowered her pen onto the table. Richard looked toward the unfinished agreement as though seeing it for the first time. Ethan exhaled quietly, realizing that every professional in the room had trusted procedure while the housekeeper had trusted conscience. Vincent gave a thoughtful nod. Courage is often mistaken for confidence, he said softly. Today I learned they are not the same thing. Naomi simply inclined her head. Before another word could be spoken, Vincent's private assistant entered the room carrying a sealed envelope marked with the logo of the company on the opposite side of the negotiation. Sir, she said carefully, this package was hand-delivered 10 minutes ago with instructions that it be opened only after the agreement was signed. Every person in the room turned toward the envelope, and for the first time that morning, Vincent chose not to reach for it himself. Instead, he quietly placed it in front of Naomi. I think, he said, you should be the first person to see what they expected me to discover too late. Naomi looked at the sealed envelope for several quiet seconds before carefully breaking the seal along its edge. She removed a single folded letter and a smaller packet of supporting documents. The paper was expensive, the printing flawless, and the language carried the same polished confidence as the contract that had nearly been signed. She began reading silently, her expression unchanged. Vincent watched her closely, searching for the smallest reaction. Around the conference table, the attorneys waited with unusual patience. After nearly a minute, Naomi placed the letter beside the contract instead of handing it back immediately. This was never meant to congratulate you, she said softly. Richard Harrison leaned forward. What is it? Naomi slid the page across the table. Read the third paragraph. Richard adjusted his glasses and quietly read the passage. His eyebrows lifted almost instantly. Maria Delgado took the letter from him and compared it against the agreement that still lay open beside her. Ethan Brooks began searching through the supporting documents one page at a time. Within moments, all three attorneys reached the same conclusion without speaking. Vincent finally broke the silence. Tell me. Richard slowly exhaled. The letter assumes the agreement has already been executed. It references authority that only exists if the revised clause remains untouched. Maria nodded. This is more than a welcome letter. It is written as though they expected immediate access to internal operational decisions after the signing. Ethan placed another page on the table. The attached implementation schedule begins tomorrow morning. They had every transition already planned. Vincent looked from one document to another, realizing that the confidence of the opposing company had not been optimism. It had been certainty. They believed the outcome was already secured. Naomi gently folded her hands together. They were never relying on persuasion after the signature. They were relying on the language before it. No one answered because there was nothing left to dispute. The evidence spoke with remarkable clarity. Vincent slowly walked toward the windows once again, watching sunlight reflect across Lake Michigan in the distance. He had spent years building a reputation for anticipating risks before anyone else noticed them. Yet today the greatest threat had almost entered his company disguised as routine paperwork. Without turning around, he asked the question that had been growing in his mind since the meeting stopped. Miss Carter, this is no longer about one sentence. You understand negotiation strategy, document sequencing, and implementation planning. Those are not skills someone acquires by accident. Naomi remained quiet long enough that the room almost accepted she would not answer. Then she spoke with calm honesty. No, sir. They are not. Vincent faced her again. Then help me understand who you really are. Naomi looked around the conference room, her eyes resting briefly on the shelves lined with awards celebrating leadership, integrity, and excellence. A faint smile crossed her face, touched more by memory than pride. Years ago, I spent my days sitting at tables very much like this one. I reviewed agreements, challenged revisions, and warned clients about language hidden beneath familiar words. I believed careful work protected people. She paused before continuing. Life changed. Titles disappeared. Opportunities disappeared. But knowledge does not disappear simply because someone stops printing it on a business card. The room remained perfectly still. For the first time that morning, no one saw Naomi as the quiet woman who cleaned offices before dawn. They saw someone whose past had remained invisible only because she had never asked anyone to notice. Vincent returned to his chair without taking his eyes off Naomi. The authority that had always defined him remained, but it had been joined by something unfamiliar, genuine curiosity. Richard Harrison quietly closed the final binder and rested both hands on the polished table. Miss Carter, he said respectfully, if you once practiced corporate law, there should be a record. Naomi gave a small nod. There is. Maria Delgado looked at her with careful interest. Then why have none of us heard your name? Naomi smiled gently, though there was sadness behind it. Because people remember headlines much longer than they remember corrections. No one interrupted. She continued in the same calm voice. Several years ago, I worked for a respected law firm in New York. My practice focused on mergers, acquisitions, and corporate governance. I loved the work because every carefully written agreement protected someone's future. Then one transaction collapsed after confidential documents were leaked before closing. I became the easiest person to blame because I had been responsible for reviewing the final drafts. Ethan Brooks frowned. Were you responsible? Naomi answered without hesitation. No. The single word carried quiet certainty rather than bitterness. An internal investigation eventually proved I had done nothing wrong. The leak came from someone outside my department. Richard looked surprised. Then why did your career end? Naomi glanced toward the skyline beyond the windows. Because the truth arrived after the reputation had already disappeared. Clients left. Opportunities disappeared. The firm survived, but I decided not to return. Sometimes rebuilding your life begins by walking away from the place where you lost it. Silence settled gently across the room. No one reached for a notebook. No one checked a telephone. The story demanded nothing except attention. Vincent finally spoke. So you accepted work wherever you could. Naomi nodded. I needed honest work. Cleaning homes and offices paid my rent, and it allowed me to begin again without asking anyone for sympathy. Maria looked around the immaculate conference room. Every surface reflected careful attention. Every chair stood perfectly aligned. She suddenly realized that Naomi approached housekeeping with the same discipline she once brought to legal practice. Excellence had never left her. It had simply found another form. Vincent slowly opened a drawer in the conference table and removed a small leather notebook, containing the names of people whose judgment he trusted without question. He studied the list for a moment before quietly closing it again. I have spent years searching for people who notice what everyone else overlooks, he said. Today I discovered one of them has been working in my building every morning before sunrise. Naomi lowered her eyes modestly. I was simply doing what I believed was right. Vincent shook his head. No. You risked your position to protect someone who might never have thanked you. That is not simply doing your job. Before Naomi could answer, Richard's telephone vibrated across the table. He glanced at the screen and immediately looked toward Vincent. Sir, the outside forensic review team has completed its emergency analysis of the agreement. Vincent gave a quiet nod. Put them on speaker. The room became completely still once again, because everyone sensed that the next voice would determine whether Naomi's remarkable judgment had merely prevented a costly mistake or uncovered something far more significant. Richard pressed the speaker button, and a clear voice filled the conference room. "This is Daniel Mercer with Mercer Forensic Legal Review. We completed the emergency comparison you requested." Every person around the table listened without moving. Daniel continued in a calm, professional tone. "We examined every draft, metadata record, revision history, and authorship log associated with the agreement. Our conclusion is unanimous. The final version contains a narrowly targeted alteration that significantly expands post-closing authority beyond what was approved during negotiations." Richard looked toward Naomi before asking, "Would an experienced attorney reasonably detect it during a standard review?" There was a brief pause before Daniel answered. "Only if that attorney questioned the language instead of assuming it remained consistent with previous drafts. The modification is exceptionally sophisticated because it relies on familiarity rather than complexity." Vincent slowly leaned back in his chair. The confirmation removed every remaining doubt. Naomi had not guessed. She had recognized a carefully concealed shift that every expert in the room had overlooked. Daniel continued, "There is something else. We traced the revision sequence. The altered language was introduced less than 48 hours before execution through an external drafting submission. It should have triggered a secondary verification, but the surrounding text remained almost identical, allowing the revision to blend into the document." Maria Delgado quietly closed her eyes for a moment. "We reviewed that version twice." "Yes," Daniel replied. "Your team verified the document accurately according to standard procedure. Whoever prepared this revision understood exactly how experienced reviewers process familiar language." The call ended a few moments later, leaving the conference room wrapped in complete silence. No one rushed to speak. No one searched for excuses. Richard slowly stood and faced Naomi. "Miss Carter," he said with genuine respect, "on behalf of everyone in this legal department, I owe you an apology. We measured your position instead of your judgment." Maria nodded. "We saw the uniform before we saw the person." Ethan added quietly, "And that nearly cost all of us." Naomi accepted their words with quiet grace. "There is nothing to apologize for. We all notice different things because we all carry different experiences." Vincent watched the exchange with thoughtful eyes. He had built an organization where excellence was rewarded, yet today he realized something equally important. Excellence could remain invisible when people only looked where they expected to find it. He walked to the head of the conference table and carefully removed the unsigned signature page from the agreement. Without tearing it or throwing it aside, he placed it into a confidential evidence folder. "This contract will never be executed," he said calmly. "Prepare a formal notice terminating negotiations effective immediately." Richard nodded. "Yes, sir. Also notify the board that the acquisition has been suspended pending a complete strategic review." Every instruction was delivered without anger, without raised voices, and without dramatic gestures. The greatest display of authority that morning came through. Discipline rather than emotion. Vincent then turned toward Naomi once more. The morning sunlight illuminated the conference room, reflecting across polished wood and crystal glass as though the room itself had quietly transformed. "You protected this company before anyone asked you to," he said. "You expected nothing in return." Naomi answered with the same humility she had shown since the beginning of the day. Doing the right thing should never depend on whether someone is watching. Vincent gave a slow, appreciative smile. "Perhaps, but recognizing the right person before it is too late is also part of doing the right thing, and I believe my next decision will prove whether I have learned that lesson." Vincent walked toward the conference room door and opened it himself, surprising everyone waiting outside. The executives who had gathered in the hallway immediately stood, expecting the signing ceremony to resume. Instead, Vincent addressed them with calm certainty. "The acquisition has been canceled. Every future agreement will undergo a completely independent legal review before it reaches my desk." No one questioned the decision. They could hear from his voice that it had already become final. As the executives quietly dispersed, Vincent turned back toward Naomi. "Would you join me in my office?" She nodded respectfully and followed him through the quiet hallway. The office overlooked the Chicago skyline, where the afternoon sun reflected across the river and painted warm light across shelves filled with photographs, awards, and decades of business history. Vincent walked behind his desk and opened a locked drawer. From inside, he removed a simple navy blue folder. Unlike the agreement that had nearly changed everything, this document contained only a few carefully prepared pages. He placed it in front of Naomi without saying a word. She opened the folder slowly. The first page carried her name. It was an offer of employment, not as a housekeeper, but as senior strategic legal advisor reporting directly to the executive office. Naomi looked up, clearly surprised. "Sir, I have been away from the legal profession for years." Vincent smiled gently. "Knowledge does not disappear because a title does. You reminded everyone in that conference room of that truth." She continued reading. The position included professional licensing support, continuing legal education, and complete authority to build an internal contract review program focused on preventing hidden risks before they reached executive approval. It was not charity. It was responsibility backed by trust. Naomi closed the folder carefully. "May I ask you one question?" Vincent nodded. "Of course. Why would you trust someone whose career ended the way mine did?" Vincent walked toward the windows and looked across the city before answering. "Because I have now seen two versions of your character. The first came from a story told by strangers years ago. The second came from your own actions today. Only one of those versions protected my company without expecting recognition." Naomi remained silent as his words settled into the room. After a long moment, she reached for the pen resting beside the folder. This time, the signature carried no hidden clause, no concealed authority, and no silent trap. It represented a new beginning built on honesty rather than assumption. She signed her name with steady confidence and slid the document back across the desk. Vincent accepted it with a quiet nod. Several weeks later, the company introduced a new review process inspired by Naomi's careful observations. Young attorneys were taught not only to analyze definitions, but also to question familiar language, challenge comfortable assumptions, and respect thoughtful voices regardless of job titles. Employees throughout the building noticed another change as well. The woman who had once arrived before sunrise carrying cleaning supplies now entered the executive floor carrying legal briefs, and every person who passed her greeted her with genuine respect. Yet Naomi never forgot where she had started. She still smiled at the custodial staff every morning, remembered every name, and thanked people whose work often went unnoticed. Vincent watched those small moments more than any courtroom skill or legal strategy, because they reminded him that true greatness revealed itself through humility long before success made it visible. And on that quiet day when one careful voice interrupted a single signature, an empire was protected, a forgotten career was restored, and everyone who witnessed it remembered what dignity truly looks like.